CODA is a comedy drama based on the 2014 French film La Famille Bélier. Directed by Son Heder and starring Emilia Jones, Troy Kotsur, and Marlee Matlin, it is a funny, often touching story of a young lady, her future ambitions, and her tight-knit family. In Massachusetts, high school student Ruby Rossi helps out with her family's fishing business, planning to work for them full-time after graduation. Since Ruby is a CODA, she is required to assist her father Frank, mother Jackie, and older brother Leo, all three of whom are deaf, with anything important, communicating and translating for them in American Sign Language. As she approaches the end of her school life, Ruby decides to follow her passion for singing and so signs up for a choir class. Ruby's teacher Mr. Villalobos sees potential in her, but she soon discovers the difficulty in finding time to practice for an upcoming recital while her family is struggling to make ends meet without her. As I stated in my review for Sound of Metal, it is easy to take for granted something like our sense of hearing, considering how simple it is to listen in on our surroundings without a second thought. That movie helped open my eyes to how appreciative we should be to have that sense at our leisure when there are many out there who aren't so lucky. A similar thing happens here with the film CODA, in that it makes you fully aware of how hard it must be to live with others who have this handicap, especially when the people in question are your own close family members. What could have been another generic coming-of-age story is instead a rather heartfelt tale of a young girl finding ways to create balance in her life. Ruby is shown to be someone who is constantly fighting an uphill battle, being the only person in her family who can hear, necessitating her involvement in their fishing business, all while contemplating whether or not this is the future she really wants. On top of that, she is also an outcast at school, where the other students tease her for being that weird girl who smells like fish and has a family who cannot communicate verbally like everyone else. Despite these issues, Ruby still loves her family unconditionally, but it presents a serious dilemma for her, as she must decide between achieving her dream of becoming a singer or staying behind to help with the business. It is this ultimatum that provides an excellent driving force for the film's plot, since it is made clear from the beginning that things could go either way. In addition to Sound of Metal, another film this one reminded me of was 1993's What's Eating Gilbert Grape. Both feature a young protagonist living in a small town who is busy tending to the needs of their unusual family while longing for a better life out in the real world. But most importantly, the two films each did a great job of humanizing its characters with irregularities without reducing them to that of a circus freak show. In spite of their deafness, Ruby's parents are depicted as a loving couple that have had an enduring marriage throughout all of their hardships. Sure, they may not be able to hear anything and argue using only sign language, but their impassioned love for each other and their two children makes them seem like a more realistic husband and wife team than most others I've seen on screen. Although the film is primarily dramatic in tone, it isn't afraid to shy away from being comedic when necessary. I was surprised at how often I was laughing at some of the strange situations that occurred throughout the story. Many of these moments involved Ruby's family, mostly from her father Frank's misunderstanding of others trying to interpret his sign language. Ruby acts as the primary translator for her family, and this means she often bears the brunt of others shooting the messenger even though she is only trying to help. Thankfully, whenever something funny occurred involving one of the deaf characters, it never felt like we were laughing at them but instead at the circumstances that led to this awkwardness in the first place. Also worth mentioning is that the film makes good use of its setting. Like What's Eating Gilbert Grape, the small town where the film takes place uses a limited amount of locations like the family home, school classrooms, or a teacher's house. The only time the film feels more open is when we see the Rossi family sailing on their fishing boat with the wide ocean symbolizing the outside world Ruby longs to see for herself. This use of smaller settings made the film seem like a low-budget indie picture. I could easily imagine this being released in the early to mid-2000s, since that was the peak era of popularity for these types of films. Unfortunately, what tarnishes the film's small-town charm is the overabundance of Apple product placement. As this film is an Apple TV Plus exclusive, some parts feature inconveniently placed shots of characters using iPhones and MacBooks, with particular emphasis on the Apple logo shoehorned into certain scenes. Though they aren't too frequent, these scenes did bother me, as it makes the film seem more corporate than it should be. Normally, a character using commercial products in a film doesn't bother me, but this time it felt as though the filmmakers were going out of their way to make a point that every electronic product being used by someone was made by Apple. Each member of the cast played their roles perfectly, with Emilia Jones providing the heart and soul of the film as Ruby. Jones seamlessly fits in with her on-screen family, whose actors are actually deaf in real life, so much so that you really get the feeling that they are related. Reportedly, Jones also learned American Sign Language over the course of 9 months in order to effectively communicate with them, using both her hand gestures and her speaking voice. It goes to show that the art of acting goes beyond simply memorizing lines from a script and that body language also plays a key part in giving a convincing performance. Many of the film's warmest moments were thanks to the dual performances of both Troy Kotsur and Marlee Matlin as Frank and Jackie. There are some genuinely poignant moments involving their interactions with Ruby. One scene with Frank involved him cracking a dad joke to her at the dinner table in typical eye-rolling fashion, but what made it so nice to watch was how he does it all through sign language. This is to remind us that even though he can't speak to her through conventional means, he is still her father and wants her to know he loves her anyway. Another scene involved Jackie talking with Ruby about her birth and the importance of that day. Without going into too much detail, this was one of the most affecting scenes in the movie that further establishes them all as a close family. Although their scenes were brief, I also liked the sibling rivalry between Ruby and Leo. Even though Leo is the older of the two, he comes across as less mature due to his hearing difficulties affecting his self-confidence. From time to time, Ruby finds herself clashing with him over the smallest of things, and this provided some interesting bonus conflict that made the story more investing than it already is. Much like Sound of Metal before it, CODA has successfully demonstrated to its audience the difficulties that arise from living without one of your primary senses. This time, however, from a familial third-person perspective rather than through the actual protagonist itself. Not only that, but it has done so in a respectable manner that never mocks its subjects or uses them for cheap entertainment. There's so much to enjoy in watching this family that don't let their physical impairments tear them apart and actually try to work through any problems constructively. It's rare to see this in films nowadays, so such integrity cannot be overstated.